Thank you. So thank you very much to the Interspeech 2019 team for having me here. I really feel very honored to be invited and also to get the chance to talk about the work we are doing at the Cognitive Systems Lab. You know, I still have very fond memories of my first Interspeech. Back then it was Eurospeech in Rhodes. It was 1997. And I just looked it up and realized that I never skip a single one. So ever since I went to Interspeech, and this is really the community I feel very connected to, and this is my home. And over the 22-something years, I really realized that we are a very successful, apparently, also very competitive, but yet very warm and welcoming community, and I wanted to thank you for this. So the talk is entitled Biosignal Processing for Human-Machine Interaction, and I thought I'd start by explaining what I mean by biosignals. So for me, a biosignal is an autonomous signal that is produced by a living organism. In our case, it's always the human being, the living organism. And these autonomous signals can be measured in physical quantities. And if you look at the graph, so the yellow blobs are basically the human activities, sometimes also called modalities. The measuring devices are various sensors, so there's a variety of sensors available, and then the result of the activities measured by the sensors then is what I would call a biosignal, and we can classify them according to the sensors into various types of biosignals. So one that is very close to our heart here is the human activity of speech. And the point I want to make here is that we can measure speech, for example, by a microphone. This would result then in an acoustic biosignal. But we can also measure speech by other sensors. And in this talk, I would like to show you different alternatives, different sensors that we can capture speech with. And I would like to explain what the benefits of those alternatives are. So what I would call the biosignal-based spoken communication, the idea here is to capture speech by alternative biosignals and then basically process the features that we can extract from these signals, much as we all know it, for example, by speech recognition, speech synthesis, so we can generate text from it, to write emails, we can synthesize it to give auditive feedback, and we can use and analyze and understand it, much as we know from the acoustic biosignal. And as you all know, speech-related activities, so if we are producing speech, it's a very complex process that basically starts in the brain. So the brain initiates this whole process, leading to also muscle activities that then finally produce different articulatory gestures, respiratory gestures, laryngeal gestures, which finally then create the acoustic signal. And these speech-related activities can be measured at each level of this speech processing. So we can start in the central and peripheral nervous system. We can also use muscle activities, the action potentials, or speech kinematics and capture those. And the benefits first of all, there's already a lot of work on this out there. So there's a panoply of sensor technologies already, starting, for example, with work from Thomas Huber, for example, working on ultrasound and video combination, or on EMA. There's work on PMA from James Gilbert. There's work on NAM, non-audible murmur, from Nakajima and colleagues. Then there is a large community doing lip reading. And lately, there's also a community working on brain activity signals captured by, for example, ECoG or microelectrodes. So there's already a number of things out there. I will mostly today talk about the work we have done, but I just want to make you aware that we are not the only one pursuing this work. What are the benefits of capturing speech in different biosignals? So first of all, by doing this, we are really standing on the shoulders of giants, because biosignals have been studied for decades to understand better the mechanisms of human speech processing. And I see two major benefits of using biosignals different from acoustics. The one is if we are capturing speech earlier on, then we can basically make benefit of that we capture speech prior to the airborne acoustic signal. So we get the benefit of having the signal earlier than what we can hear and capture from the microphone. This is number one. And number two, we could even capture speech if the acoustic output is not available or not desirable. So that means we can, for example, approach things like if somebody is mouthing speech, or we could approach things where somebody's just thinking about speaking. And here we differentiate between, so silent speech for me is if somebody is mouthing speech but doesn't make audible sound. Imagined speech is where somebody is imagining or thinking about producing articulation but without performing actually the articulation. And then we would discriminate this from what I would call inner speech, that is a more internalized process in which we are thinking in pure meaning without any phonological properties or turn taking and so on. So by basically leveraging off these two major benefits, in my sense, this basically opens up then novel use cases, which I coined biosignal-based spoken communication. And I see four major novel use cases that we could approach here. One is a robust speech communication in the sense that if there's a lot of noise in the environment, one could, for example, complement this by other biosignals. The second one is what we would call mute communication. This is communication where we avoid disturbance of quiet environments by speaking silently. The third one is where we can restore communication, that is, for example, building towards voice prosthesis for individuals who are unable to speak. And the fourth is speech training and therapy, where, for example, a biosignal could provide valuable feedback, for example, to increase articulatory awareness for therapy and training. And in my talk here, I will focus on two, on the mute communication and restore spoken communication. But you probably, some of you have seen the tutorial on Sunday given by Thomas Hüber and Christian Herf. They were also talking about possible applications in the range of speech therapy and language learning. So for the purpose of the flow of the talk, I just want to briefly mention that some of you may know that I started out in acoustic speech recognition. So my PhD was on speech recognition in multilingual languages. And I'm using here a graph which, as we learned yesterday from Ralf Schlüter's great talk, I mean, there has been a lot of things happening in automatic speech recognition, but for the purpose here, I just go with the classical version of that we have basically three boxes. So first we have on the top left side, we have a box where we're capturing speech-related activities. In classical acoustic speech recognition, the modality would be speech. The sensor we are capturing speech with would be the microphone, and that would then result in acoustic biosignals. And then we have on the right top, we have a box which then does the signal processing, where we are extracting relevant features. And then based on these features, we put this into a box which we call automatic speech recognition. This is in the traditional way would be we are looking for the most likely word sequence spoken given the acoustic signal X. So about 15 years ago, back in my time at CMU, I started in a collaboration with Alex Weibel and Florian Metze. We started thinking about what if we capture the acoustic, the speech signal not as when it's airborne, so as an acoustic signal, but we are capturing it at a time where a person is articulating. That is, we are capturing the muscle activity which comes from producing sound. And so what we did is we equipped our subjects with little surface electrodes, and we did one trick. We captured basically in parallel, in a synchronized fashion, we captured the EMG, the electromyographic signal, in parallel to the acoustic signal. So we have, can we see this? Yeah, we have basically the acoustic signal next to the muscle activity signal, and then we applied first the acoustic recognition engine in order to create labels. And we learned how to process the EMG signals such that we extract relevant features. And then we apply basically the whole shenanigan, so the whole ASR. So we treat the EMG signal much like the acoustic signal, and what comes out is text. So what's the benefit of this? The benefit of this is that the so-called EMG stands for electromyography, that captures the muscle activity, the electrical potentials of the muscle activity that results from the innervation of the muscles. And that means the EMG signal does not care at all about what audible output is produced. It only cares about the muscle activity. And that means for this kind of speech recognition, it doesn't matter whether I say hello or, so for this machine, it's the same thing because EMG just looks at the muscle activity. And this leads then to what we termed silent speech interfaces. And the silent speech interfaces, they have a couple of benefits. First of all, we could speak silently without disturbing our neighbors. So think about doing a phone call during a presentation. Nobody would care because you just simply mouth what you want to say. It's also possible to keep privacy by, for example, transmitting confidential information just silently if you give passwords or proper names or whatnot. The third one would be noise robustness. That is, we could use this in very noise-corrupted environments. And last but not least, it could be a help and support for individuals who are speech impaired, who, for example, lost their vocal folds due to cancer. There are a couple of challenges that we have from EMG speech recognition. And I just picked one recent results that had been presented by Michael Wandt in Interspeech 2018. So one of the issues is if we apply the sensors, do the recordings, and then we take the sensors off and reapply them, chances are high that we are not able to exactly hit the very same position in the muscles, and that means it results in different activities. And we called this issue session dependence. And Michael was applying adversarial training to implement session-independent EMG ASR, and he managed to get really much better results by applying the trick that he makes the data of different sessions more confusable in order to improve the target classification accuracy. By the way, if you want to try yourself, please feel free to take the trial corpus, which is available from our webpage. So the benchmark numbers are also available on the Interspeech 2014 paper, also from Michael. So you can play around with this and see yourself what you get there. Another challenge with EMG-based speech recognition that we faced early is the issue that if a speaker mouths silently, he or she does not get auditory feedback. And that means he or she can no longer rely on getting the auditory and the sensory feedback, the motor sensory feedback, in order to hit the articulatory targets very well. And we did an investigation, and what you see here in the graphs is we have on your left side, there is the group of speakers that we called good silent speakers. This is the group where our speech recognition results turned out to be well under 40% error rates. It's still high, but... And then we have a group of bad silent speakers. These are those where the word error rates deteriorated drastically. And you see three graphs. You see the black graph, which corresponds to the power spectral densities over all the frequencies for those sentences which had been spoken audibly. You see the red one, these are those sentences which had been spoken in a whispered manner, and you see the blue ones which had been spoken in a completely silent manner. And what's quite obvious is that the good silent speakers managed to keep their power spectral densities rather stable across these different speaking modes, while the bad silent speakers are not able to do this. And apparently the bad silent speakers are those who really suffer from the lack of auditory feedback. So if they only rely on the sensomotory feedback, they are not able to produce or well articulate speech. And that means they're sort of starting slurring. And that brought us to the issue that probably the best cure in order to avoid this is if we would be able to provide instant feedback, instant auditory feedback, even if a person speaks silently. And that brought us to what I would call direct synthesis. That is, rather than doing speech recognition, where we are transforming the EMG signal into text, we do a direct transformation from the EMG signal into audible speech, and then basically feed this back into the ear of the silent speaker. And so there is a couple of works that we did there, and I first play you initial results from 2014, actually, where Matthias Janke resynthesized first the normal audible speech.
He is trying to cut some of the benefits.
And then the second one is where he's using a deep neural network in order to transform directly the EMG signal into speech, and this sounds like this.
He's trying to cut some of the benefits.
And I'm sorry for the buzz of the vocoder, but I hope you got the point that we are able to synthesize directly from EMG into something audible, which would provide support and auditory feedback if somebody is about losing his articulation. Now, one of the issues with these results were that the feedback was too much delayed in order to be really helpful during the articulation. And therefore, we lately built low latency synthesis, where we would be able to really put the human in the loop. So that means this is work from Lawrence Diener, who just presented this in the doctoral consortium. Here we are taking, we're leveraging off the benefit that the EMG signal precedes the audio signal by roughly 50 milliseconds. This is what we found from our experiments. That is, we can 50 milliseconds before the signal becomes airborne, we can start synthesizing the sound, so that we basically provide almost instant auditory feedback while a person is producing silent speech. So when we were there, so we had basically acoustic speech recognition from the acoustic signal. We had the silent speech recognition from the EMG signal. By the way, we termed this EMG to text and EMG to speech. And then we thought about, okay, if we can use the muscle activity to create speech and text, how about we go one level further up and use the brain activity that corresponds to initiating the articulatory motion in the muscles? So how about trying to capture what in the brain, basically the brain areas that initiate the muscle activity? And this one we coined brain to text and brain to speech. And here we were lucky to work together and to collaborate with Gerf Schalk's group, who is in Albany, and he works together with people in the medical center, and they are working with patients that have intractable epilepsy. So they are in the position that they are basically getting implants, electrode implants in the skull. So they basically remove the skull and then place the electrodes just right on top of the cortex, which for them serves the purpose of finding out in which areas epilepsy really starts. And for us, we can take the benefit of using signals which are not very noisy because they're directly recorded on the cortex. So you see a patient here with a montage of an electrode grid. And we worked with data from 7 patients, and you see in the lower left side there, the brain layout is very different, and also the electrode positioning is very different. So we don't have any control over the electrodes. This setting is really just due to medical needs. So the first thing we had to do in order to do this across patients, we co-registered them in a common space and basically put a layover. And then we applied basically the very same strategy that I showed you with EMG-based speech recognition, so that again we asked the patients to speak aloud. So we prompted them for sentences. They're speaking out aloud the sentences, and in parallel we are recording the ECoG signal, so the intracranial EEG, from all the electrodes they have in their montage. And then we can again use the acoustic speech recognition results, so we can label basically the speech in terms of phonemes, and then we impose the labels on the ECoG signals. And then basically we can do the same that we did in EMG, that is, we can feed in the ECoG signals into ASR and then do what we call brain-to-text recognition. Now, the most difficult part was, since we have so many electrodes as the ECoG montage, we had up to 120 channels. And from each of the channels, we first had to figure out what kind of features would be reasonable and reliable to correlate with speech activity. And out of these many features, we would also have to do a feature selection in order to keep the dimensionality down. So we had up to 120 channels, so 120 electrode connections. We extracted the log power of the broadband gamma, so this is the brain waves in the area of 70 to 170 hertz. We did this in 50 millisecond intervals with a 25 millisecond overlap to address also the fast speed of speech processing. And we stacked this in a lot of neighboring frames in order to get a broader view. That results in a feature space which is about 900 dimensions. And what we did then was that we're looking into a procedure to tell us to select the features based on their discriminability, and the discriminability basically between the different phones in our sentences. So we used the Kalber-Gleibler divergence in order to do this. So we calculated the divergence between each phone pair relevant to discriminate the words that the patients had been spoken. And the interesting outcome of this is also, if we plot the divergences across the brain area, this allows us then to interpret or basically watch the brain while a person is talking and interpret those areas which seem to be the most important ones to discriminate sounds while producing speech. And I play this to you.
I've always been committed, and to which we are committed today.
So the sound had been anonymized so that the subject cannot be identified. And what I would like to point out here is, now you can, while the person is producing speech, we can see which areas in the brain are the most important ones to discriminate sounds. And we were really happy to see that those areas that turned out to be the most discriminative during speaking are basically resided in the motor area. Which makes sense, and also for the planning we had.
Always
sorry.
Been
for the planning we had the areas of Broca, and for the end, about 100 milliseconds after producing it, we had high discriminability in the auditory cortex. So the findings we had from feature selection really made also sense in terms of speech production. So in case you found this video was familiar to you, maybe you have seen this in the announcement of Facebook that they did about 2 years after the paper came out. So you see here Regina Dugan talking about our video, and we were really flattened that they did this. We also were very happy that they gave our video a nice professional touch. But we would have been even more happy if they had referenced that this is our work and our video that they take. Yeah. Okay, so the same idea, like I said before, with the direct synthesis in EMG also applies to ECoG for the very same reasons. So think about if we would manage to have a person imagining speaking, then it would be very valuable for this person to get auditory feedback. And if you think about voice prosthesis for people who are not able to talk anymore, this would be then the direction to enable, like for example, locked-in patients to think of speaking and then hearing what the machine interprets in terms of ECoG. And here we have two approaches. So we first wanted to see whether this is possible at all. So we created a high-quality speech output with a dual neural network, and we basically convert the ECoG into MFCC coefficients and then use the WaveNet to produce audible sound. And I play this in a minute to you. This was work done by Michael Angrick in our lab. And then another one in order to really pursue an instant feedback. This is a very fast and straightforward codebook-based unit selection approach, which has been done by Christian Herf, also in collaboration with people from Western University who provided the ECoG-based data. And that looks like this. So we basically record data. Then we have tested, so from the recorded train data, we basically select or train a lot of units. Then we're using the test data and take snippets out of it, compare it along the maximum cosine similarity to our training data, and then simply stitch those units together in order to provide output. And what you hear in a second is the output, which is solely driven from ECoG, so directly converted from ECoG to audible speech. So this is a person just producing this from ECoG. However, this person was speaking out loud, so she was still able to produce audible sound. And so the other approach where we are using DNNs to first convert ECoG into MFCCs and then use the WaveNet to produce the sound, that has been also featured in the Science magazine, along with work from Eddie Cheng and also Nima Meskarani. And I'm playing you how that sounds if we're solely driving from ECoG speech synthesis.
Waited to start.
So you first hear the real one,
Right. No.
and then you hear the synthesized one.
Garage. Garage. Move. No. Version. Version. Hit. Yep. Dab. Dab. Rain. Bang. And. Haze.
Okay, so of course we use the trick to first play you the audio and then play the ECoG-driven one, but so that sort of convinced us that apparently the ECoG signal really provide valuable information which would eventually lead to maybe the option of speech restoration by voice prosthesis. So lately we did yet another step, and this has to do with functional electrical stimulation. And the wild idea or vision here is that we might be able to do speech rehabilitation by using ECoG signals, transforming these ECoG signals directly into stimulation patterns, and then these stimulation patterns would stimulate the articulatory muscles, which then produce speech. So this basically could help to restore the articulatory movement just driven by brain signal alone. We're not there yet, we're not even near that, but we did first results or first experiments in a proof of concept. So what we wanted to see is, first of all, which muscles would be accessible for us so that we can stimulate them in order to produce sounds. So we first did an EMG analysis. So we had one of our subjects wearing a lot of EMG electrodes, and we analyzed the frame-based power of each muscle during production of speech. And we settled for this proof of concept for one muscle, the zygomaticus major, and we used this muscle first of all because it's reasonably isolated, so that if we're stimulating this muscle, it would not have a lot of cross stimulation with other facial muscles. And second, it's distant from critical areas like the eye or the carotid artery, because we are quite new to stimulation and we didn't want to kill ourselves. So what we did is we isolated, we said, okay, we're going to do the zygomaticus major, and we know from this muscle that it draws the mouth angle laterally. And so we thought we might be able, by stimulating this, that we can produce something like a vowel V vowel sound, so something like ava and ev if the mouth is drawn laterally. So in the stimulation experiments, we had participants wearing headphones. We asked them to voluntarily do an excitation in order to produce vowels like a and e. And then we started first from vowels, and then we started from, and then we basically stimulate. So a person is doing ah, we stimulate the muscle so that the mouth is drawn laterally, so ah, ve, ah. So this is what we did. And we did 3 different tasks. So we had the voluntary articulation only, so the person is just articulating. The second one is the person is hitting the stimulation button, him or herself. That is, we're producing an R, then hit stimulation, the muscle gets stimulated, and we record what comes out. And the third task was that there's somebody else controlling the stimulation. So at some point, somebody hits the button, and then the muscle gets stimulated. And we looked at those results. I mean, as I said, it's a proof of concept. So we did first, on your left side, you see the visual inspection of the acoustics. So the top one is where somebody's voluntarily articulating AVA. The second one is where the person then controls him or herself, in this case himself, the AVA, and in the third one, it's somebody else that controls the stimulation. So there is some visual resemblance, but we also see that we're nowhere near to really produce a full AVA or EV consonant-vowel consonant combination, vowel-consonant-vowel combination. So we also did an analysis on the Pearson correlations. So we basically correlated the MFCCs with a reference. We did this prior to stimulus and for the whole spectrogram. And what you see here are the correlation coefficients. The blue ones are the ones pre-stimulus, and the red ones are the ones for the entire spectrogram. And you see this for the external controlled and the self-controlled for AVA and EV. So what we do see is we get reasonable correlations between the pre-stimulus and the voluntary ones, but we do get significantly lower correlations for the complete spectrogram, which is sort of a hint that as of now, at least the auditory output during the stimulation does not really well mimic the real production of a consonant like the. And I must admit that we also we learned a lot on how complex and how hard and it is to produce audible sounds, and we're really at awe what humans are able to do, and we would like to explore this more, but my feeling is that it will take us many years in order to get somewhere close to something that sounds like human speech. So in case this sparks your interest, there was a special issue that we did 2 years ago together with Thomas Huber, Dean Trusinski, and John Brumberg. So it does have 13 papers on different biosignals used for spoken communication, and it also has a survey paper. So in case you're interested, this might be a good starting point to get into the state of the art back then. So the remainder time I would like to use to also explain to you and tell you about what we are up to at the University in Bremen lately. So University Bremen has dedicated a lot of funds on the subjects of what's called Minds Media Machines. So there's a high profile area, Minds Media Machines. And here we are dedicated to enhance our understanding on human cognition and information processing, which we refer to minds, and combine this with robotics and intelligence, which is the machines part, and also use this for a deep mediation and datafication. This is the media part. And one of the flagships of this high-profile area in Bremen is, oh, and I forgot one thing I wanted to mention, that we're really happy that we could convince Professor Hai Jolie to be an excellence chair, so he is already collaborating within the Mainz Media Machines to drive this area forward. And so one of the flagships of this high-profile area is a collaborative research center, which is called EASE. EASE stands for Everyday Activity Science and Engineering. And the idea here is really to get an understanding how robotic agents perform or enable robotic agents to perform everyday activities by simply instructing them. For example, simply say, make breakfast for the family, and then the robot would go away and do this. And the part we are driving in our lab is the part that we are observing, recording and observing human everyday activities, also complex ones, and that we are, together with our collaborators, want to build structured models which then basically inform the robotic agents. And the structured model would go into what is called here narrative-enabled episodic memories. So there are basically episodic memories which will go into a large database that is made available also to the community. It's called OpenEase. And this database is basically retrievable for robotic agents to inform themselves how they could perform a human action. And so our purpose is to really feed this database with a multitude of biosignals, so that makes sense out of human activities. And in order to do so, we built up a biosignals lab, which is an interaction space. And in this interaction space, we can acquire cross-modal, high-dimensional biosignals. And we acquire, in a time-synchronous way, speech and audio from near and far microphones. We capture motion by OptiTrack systems and also by inertial sensors. We capture muscle activity by EMG, by mobile ones and also stationary ones. We capture eye movement, and we capture brain activities, both with a mobile EEG, but also with a MRI scanner, which I will tell you in a minute.
So here,
So this is
forks and the knife, make it nice, because it's formal. So we are going to drink wine. In Italy would be like this, I don't know in Germany. Here there is the wine and the water.
okay, so the idea is to record this all in parallel, and as you heard, we made the subjects also think aloud what they are doing, so they are asked in a concurrent way to explain what they are currently doing. And we are using ASR to transcribe what they are doing, so we have transcriptions. We have, along with the speech signals, unfortunately you can't see this, there are also all the other signals, the EMG, the EEG. You see here the output of the motion tracker, and you see here what the person is doing in different angles from camera. And there are a couple of other signals that we suppressed. So the idea is to provide this in a time-aligned fashion in such a score file we call a partitur. We are also developing, in collaboration with our partners, common concepts and ontologies. And we are striving for consistent annotation in order to then guide the model learning. And now we started to do model learning from speech, from video, from brain activity. And we will make this data available to the community as soon as we are ready. So we're not quite there, but we want to do 100 people, and we settled for now for a table setting task, but we will move to more complex activities over time. And on Monday, probably you've seen this, we had one presentation where we are learning models from speech. So first of all, we want to figure out whether the concurrent think-alouds or the retrospective think-alouds do help us to do a structuring, a semantic structuring of the human activity. And in a second work, together with our collaborators of the Department of Neuropsychology, we are learning models from brain activity. So here we did, for now, a feasibility study. It's a proof of concept whether we could use the first perspective, that is the outcome of the eye tracker from our subjects. So the subjects perform their task. They have a first eye perspective of what they're doing. This is the first eye perspective. And we're feeding this first eye perspective into the monitor of the person, of a second person lying in the fMRI scanner. And we're doing this under the premise that the perception of the action that is taken, and that the perception of the action of the person in the scanner basically leads to comparable brain activities as the ones of the person actually pursuing the task. So the idea is, if somebody watches the monitor and watches in a first eye perspective of grasping things, that he or she feels like she's doing this her or himself. And then we are identifying task-related components of the human cognition using the semantic annotations, and we're using, or our colleagues are using, fMRI constrained by EEG, and they're extracting, based on an independent component analysis, they're extracting those areas in the brain that seem to be the most important one for understanding the current interaction or the current behavior. And what comes out is this. So this is the first eye perspective of a person pursuing something, and the red coloring that you see is basically the points in time that the ICA in the brain activity say there is something special going on. So in our collaborators from neuropsychology, they told us that those areas in the brain that had been identified by the ICA is an area which is usually called an interface between the visual input and the object recognition. So apparently, just by looking at the most important components in the brain areas, we might be able to structure human tasks like table settings into interesting things where grasping happens and where no things happen or not important things happen. So we will use also this work in order to automatically annotate human activities or human everyday activities. We were thinking of taking this one step further and also looking into more complex interactions. And the idea is that we have a person in the biosignals lab pursuing activities. We have a second person in the MRI scanner watching this person. And in order to make them interact, we thought, okay, the first person in the biosignals lab, he or she is picking, for example, or making food choices, and the person in the MRT is evaluating those food choices and feeds the evaluation back to the first subject. So this way, the two people can really interact with each other. And in order to do this, we basically linked the two labs. So we linked the biosignals lab with a neuroimaging lab, where the MRI scanner and the high density EEG is. So we are basically feeding the first eye perspective of this subject into the monitor of the person in the MRI scanner, and this person is then taking decisions or evaluating decisions and relaying this back to the person in the biosignal lab. And with this established link, we are now looking forward into a new project, which is a grad school project where we're educating students. And in this way, this is called the Karlsruhe Design and Decision School. And in this way, we will link more labs with these two labs. And most importantly, what I'm really excited about, we will link the KD2 lab, which is a lab that is equipped with 40 cabins, where we can record biosignals and also other reactions from people in parallel. So we could, for example, have 40 people in parallel watching what's going on in the biosignal lab or in the MRI scanner, and then doing, for example, evaluation or think alouds. And so this is what we are now looking forward doing in the next steps. in order to also be able to, create really novel experiments and studies by linking those labs together. Also establishing joint protocols and standards, and more so also training students across disciplines to sort of get adjusted to all these technologies and the sensors that are available there. So this brings me to the conclusion. So the main points that I wanted to drive home is, number one, think beyond acoustics. Think about speech on not only on the acoustic signal, but leverage of speech-related biosignals and take benefit of that we could capture the speech prior to the airborne signal, and we could capture speech even if no audible output is either available or desirable. And the second thing I wanted to drive home is that cross-modal time-aligned biosignals may help us to understand better human activities, and also may help us to structure these fully automatically. And last but not least, the idea of linking labs will probably give us the possibility to do completely novel studies which we wouldn't be able to do by ourselves. With this, I thank you very much for your attention. I also thank the students who were involved in the CSL lab, our visitors, our collaborators, and of course also the institutions that funded this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for an excellent keynote speech. We still have some time for questions. Yes?
I have one question, actually two questions. One is that how would you assess the ability of EMGs to pick up tongue articulation? And second, how would you compare and contrast the capability of EMG against just taking a video of the person?
Yep, thank you for those questions. Actually, this is another challenge which I didn't get into, but you're quite right. With EMG, of course, we have limited capabilities of, for example, getting something on the tongue tip. So we can capture a little bit of the tongue root by these muscles underneath the chin, but there is no way that with surface EEG we would capture the tongue tip. And this is one of the reasons why we will not get the full information on the articulation. And probably related to that is also that, so roughly if I compare acoustic speech recognition to EMG speech recognition under clean conditions, so if we have an audible signal in an audible acoustic signal compared to an EMG of an audible acoustic signal, then we're suffering about twice as much word error rate. So we're doubling the word error rate based on EMG if we have a clear audible signal. Of course, if you don't have a signal, an acoustic signal, then the word error rate for normal ASR is quite high.
Yeah,
Please.
can I?
Thank you very much, Tony. It was a great talk. At the beginning, you talked about thought-to-speech as well, but isn't the whole concept of that really rather illogical, in fact, philosophically very difficult, in that if you don't engage any phonological component in thinking about sentences and producing language, then you have no basis upon which to produce sound and articulation in a form which another person can comprehend. The neural patterns of thinking about a sentence in one speaker is going to be completely different from the neural patterns of thinking about the same sentence in another speaker. Without a phonological component, there is no mapping between one person's brain and another person's brain.
Yes, very good. Thank you very much. And this was one of the reasons why I was trying in the beginning to discriminate between what I would call imagined speech. And imagined speech refers, in my view, refers to where we are asking a person to really think about producing the speech. So we do have the phonological structure because the person is thinking about producing it, assuming that the person would be able to think about producing it. And I discriminated this from what I would call inner speech. And inner speech is, where you just having thoughts flying through your head, and there might not be a motor or a motor cortex area related innervation going on, because it's, like you said, there's no turn taking, no pauses, no phones. So, and what we tried is the first case, so where we really ask people to think about producing a word rather than trying to capture their thoughts, yeah, which we don't want to do. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I have two questions here. The first question is on here.
Thanks. I hear my.
One is on this. When you worked with epileptic patients, did you find there was some plasticity in terms of the language centers being moved? For example, left side is supposed to activate the right side and vice versa. But there is a claim that language centers actually move from the left to the right. And that's why there are a lot of issues about removing parts of the brain. And the second question is, do we really think in terms of phonemes? I mean, there is some study which says that neurocortical oscillations happen at the syllable level.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So for the first question, you're asking the wrong person. I never worked with these patients. Basically, we got the data from our collaborators who recorded the data. So far, I have not worked with any of the patients. About the lateralization, I would rather refer this to the neuroscience people. Then I don't want to answer that one. And the second question, with regards to, do we really think in phones or in syllables? As you may know, there is early work about that one can capture something that is similar to articulatory features in brain activity. And I feel that our work, where we are really focusing on phone models, indicates that there is evidence that we are thinking in terms of phones rather than syllables. We didn't try the syllables because phones give us more flexibility in terms of ASR, but I believe that the results show that there is indeed evidence that we do think in phones if we are asked to imagine speech. Does it answer your question?
Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Hi, thanks, Taeyang, for the fantastic work. I do believe the speech-driven beats are promising right now, but there may be some other difficulties or challenges before we can actually use it for patients. Would you comment on this, in terms of hardware or software? What's the next step of the field?
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, I would like to stress that this work was done on audible speech. So there is no continuous speech recognition or synthesis, to best of my knowledge yet, that does it with imagined speech. So there is, like Eddie showed, first results on silent speech. So as long as the articulation is there, we can see the brain areas in the motor cortex doing the initialization. This has not been done with imagined speech, so this is one issue. The second issue, with respect also to apparatus and methods, in order to really make full use of the idea of giving people instant feedback, of course we would need to have the low latency synthesis working from ECoG in order to get immediate feedback, and we would need to bring this into clinics in order to have people using this, which is always an extra critical thing. I think that's basically the two major things which I believe are the next big steps in this direction. Does it answer your question?
Thank you, yes.
Okay, we have time for one more question, please, if there is.
Okay. I'm here at the back on your right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm very interested into music production with the brain. What would be your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so Christian Herf, who did also the ASR work, he at the same time worked on the same patients on rhythm, and I thought this was really interesting because a study he, for example, did is that they would play rhythms to people and record brain responses, and then they skip the rhythm, and the responses in the brain would clearly say that the person go along a rhythm they don't hear. So And this might also be very suitable for using for our speech recognition work, because also speech has an inherent rhythm. So I believe there's a lot of in there. But I personally have not done any work on music and brain, so I would not be very helpful at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great talk, Tanya, and thank you for all the questions and the discussion. I would like to hand you over the picture for the memory of your talk.
Thank you very much.
Please do not leave the room. We have few important announcements to make. Please, Gernot.
Thanks for hanging on a minute. I just want to give you an update for today's social events. I guess yesterday we had a very nice welcome reception. Tonight there's two options for the students. We have a student reception in our Nikola Tesla laboratory. I provide here the address unless you have spotted this already elsewhere. So it starts at 6:30 in Feldgasse 18. And this is really at walking distance. It's 15 minutes walk. And there's two acts there, one performance by Christoph Ressi, an audiovisual performance, and Nicolas Juch will give you an impression, not just of mechanical speech production as we saw it yesterday, but tonight it will be electric speech production, speech produced by the plasma of an electric arc. So can we have the video, please?
Dear students of Interspeech 2019, we want to invite you to our student reception on Tuesday, 17th of September at 6 o'clock in the Nikola Tesla laboratory at TU Graz. See you there.
So that was our student coordinator, Kati Pollack, inviting you all. So if you want to see this in real life, please come. And there's a second event, which is here it is, the viewer event. So if you have been a viewer for this conference, we want to thank you very much for your efforts. Thomas Hein has reported on your big efforts that were necessary to make this a huge success. So to say thank you, we invite you for a concert performance at the so-called Mumut, which is the House for Music and Music Theatre of our University of Music and Performing Arts. It's in Lichtenfelsgasse 14, starting at 7. And the performance will be given by the big band orchestra of that university under the direction of Sigi Feiger. Please note that this university was the first on continental Europe to start an academic jazz program ever, more than 50 years ago. So to go there, you take the tram. You can walk, but it's a little longer than usual, maybe 25 minutes. So you could take the tram and then switch to tram 1 or 7. That brings you right to a stop in front of that building. So please get there. I hope that all of you come. Then it will be very crowded. So I have to maybe warn you that some of you may not really fit in the concert hall. And then we have very nice drinks to enjoy, a video projector in the foyer of the concert hall. But I guess most of you will fit in. And I count on that you all get there. Thank you. That's about it. And enjoy the coffee break and the rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Gernot. This concludes today's keynote speech, and enjoy conference.